Alright guys, today we've got a requested video, the 7 Pro versus the LG V60, which is actually a very interesting comparison if you're thinking about picking up these two phones as a daily driver. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to talk about the price because I think that's pretty interesting too. So 7 Pro is going for around 300 bucks for the regular one, and then you have a 5G version, and that's a little bit more expensive, around 400 bucks. The V60 you can find brand new 400 bucks, and I'll have those links down below. So let's go over the hardware. The 7 Pro, it's a glass and metal phone. I think it still looks really good. There's no official IP rating on here, but just do note that it can get wet. So you do have your mute vibration switch, power button. You also have your volume rocker. No headphone jack on the 7 Pro, which is also something you should pay attention to if that is something that you really want. USB Type-C and stereo speakers. Again, design-wise, very thin, feels pretty solid in the hand. The V60, same story. It's a glass and metal design as well. I think it still looks good in 2021. But the V60, if you look, it actually does have a headphone jack on here. So you do have that headphone jack with the quad DAC, which is really nice. So if you're really into high quality audio, then the V60 will deliver that. USB Type-C, same stereo speakers on here as well. So they both feel super solid in the hand as far as build quality. Alright, so right off the bat, the displays are the two things that make these phones very different. So on the 7 Pro, you have a 6.67 inch 1440p Fluid AMOLED display. It's a 90 Hz display, HDR10+, 516 for the PPI. On the V60 here, you have a POLED display, HDR10, 6.8 inches. So it's slightly bigger than the 7 Pro, as you can see. But it's 1080p and 395 for the PPI. So you have a lower PPI and a lower resolution on the V60 compared to the 7 Pro. So overall, the display does look much sharper. There's no intrusion, and you have a more bezel-less experience on the 7 Pro as well, which is something that I really appreciate. So the 7 Pro is really geared towards people that are really into media, and you want that sort of seamless experience without any interruption. So like I said, when you come into an actual application, you can see like the difference here with just a smaller bezels. Also, there's no notch on the 7 Pro. And overall, the 7 Pro, if you pull up a 1440p video, it is going to be a sharper looking display as well. But that's no knock on the V60's display. So also another thing that is pretty essential these days is high refresh rate. The 7 Pro does have 90 Hz, which is definitely suitable for 2021, even though we have, 120, 144. The 90 Hz still is fine on here. The V60 does not have any type of high refresh rate. But the V60 also does have dual display technology, so you can actually buy a dual screen case with the V60, and you can basically turn it into two phones. So as you can see, pretty interesting trade-offs as far as the displays go. One, you have a more higher resolution display with no notch, more seamless experience, and then on the V60 you have still a great OLED display, but there's no high refresh rate, no 1440p, and also you get that dual screen case. So it's a pretty interesting trade-off for me personally. You guys know how I feel. I prefer the 7 Pro's display all the way. I'm not a huge fan of the dual display. But yeah, so that is your sort of choice between display qualities. Both phones are running Android 11. Now you will get more updates on the 7 Pro as far as like patches and stuff like that. OnePlus does a pretty good job at that. But also, one thing to note is that the life cycle, I believe, for the V60, if LG sticks to what they said, their promise, this will get more updates in the 7 Pro. Android 13, I believe, will be the last big, update, and it'll probably still get security patches and stuff, but it'll be the last OS update, which is pretty interesting to think about. So as far as just the speed of the overall phones, both of these phones are very fast here. So just to let you know the specs on the V60, we do have the Snapdragon 865 and Adreno 650, micro SD support, 128 gigs of internal storage and 8 gigs of RAM. Now, depending on which configuration of the 7 Pro you get, you have the Snapdragon 855, but you do not get any micro SD support. You have the Adreno 640 graphics on here, but you do get 128 or 256, and depending on which configuration, it will be 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. So I think that's still pretty good on the 7 Pro's part, but you do get more storage overall on the V60. So if you're really heavy into downloading a lot of content, that is also something to consider. But the V60 of course will be the much faster device here, mostly because you know, it's got a newer chipset in it. And if you pull up the Geekbench scores here, you can see it does outperform you know, pretty decently. And in a real world test, we shouldn't see a massive difference, but let's go ahead and see. Yeah, so it'll just be slightly behind, but not anything that would be super noticeable. I think where you'll see that power at is with gaming. Because when you're launching applications, it is slightly faster, but I don't think it's anything too crazy. So you can see, not anything too crazy, but you will notice overall when you're getting into applications and stuff like that, the experience will be a little bit faster on the V60 for sure here. Now, as far as your gaming experience, like I said, I think the V60 in a long, you know, run will age a little bit better because of the processor's power. But right now, you know, you pretty much have the same settings here, or actually with the 7 Pro, we have a 90 frames per second on smooth. We don't have that on the V60. You can see, and then I could download Ultra HD, and then on the V60, you know, we can also go up to Ultra HD as well. But as far as, like, you know, we have that 90 FPS because we have that 90 Hertz display on here. So that is one thing to, you know, consider. Also, you know, I just think it's really cool to game on the 7 Pro because you have like that notchless experience with the sort of minimal bezel. So it does give you like a really cool sort of like immersive experience. But then on the you know, on the V60, you also have the experience where you can pretty much do a dual screen sort of setup here. So for example, if I wanted to play Asphalt, I would have my dual screen showing me the map and stuff like that. But the V60 also is going to run extremely smooth. It's going to look great even at ultra graphics and stuff. So gaming on both of these phones is awesome. You just have to sort of pick and choose which one you want to game on. So the 7 Pro speaker should not be louder than the V60, but let's go ahead and hear. Yeah, you do get an overall fuller sound on the V60 still. It's louder. Yeah, it's definitely louder and just more thumpier. So I think for audio experience, the 7 Pro is fine, but no headphone jack. You know, you would have to give the audio experience to the V60, of course. Louder speakers, and also you get a quad DAC with that headphone jack, which is really nice. So both of these phones do have NFC as well, which is really nice. And they both have your always on display. They both have your under the display fingerprint sensor. As you can see, boom. I do think the 7 Pro's fingerprint sensor is faster than the V60's. They're both accurate, so they don't mess up. But I do think the overall like experience feels faster on the 7 Pro. It feels smoother. I think that 90 Hertz has a lot to do with it as well. Now, the 7 Pro also has the option to do face unlock, which the V60 does not. So I can unlock with that pop-up camera. On the 7 Pro, there's no face unlock option for the V60. Alright, so I do want to talk about image quality and the camera that I prefer here. I do think the V60 does take better photos than the 7 Pro. Now, if you download Gcam, you can get kind of closer photos, but again, if you download Gcam on the V60, you still get better photos. So overall, I would give a slight edge to the V60. It's got a 64 megapixel standard, 13 megapixel ultra wide. You do have a 0.3 depth sensor. You actually can shoot in 8K, and you have a 10 megapixel selfie that can shoot in 4K. And overall, images just look pretty good, pretty natural color. You also get a really good ultra wide. Overall detail is really good. It's not a knock on the 7 Pro. It's got a triple camera setup as well, 48 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel telephoto, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You can only shoot in 4K compared to the V60's 8K. And then on the front, you have a 16 megapixel selfie, but that can only shoot in 1080p compared to the 4K on the V60. So overall, you just have better numbers on the V60 as well. And image quality does look really good on the 7 Pro. I take pictures with it all the time. It's fine. I still use it till this day. And it takes great photos. My only issue is the color science isn't always that great, which OnePlus has improved with the newer OnePlus phones. But the telephoto is fine. The ultra wide is fine. It gives good detail. And, you know, when you can take a decent shot and good lighting, and it comes out fine. So I never had an issue with the shots on there. But yeah, V60 I would give 4 cameras. Alright, so what is the battery situation looking like on both of these phones? Well, both phones actually have very good battery life, but there are some trade-offs here. So the V60 does have the overall better battery life at 5,000 milliamps with fast charging and wireless charging as well. And the OnePlus 7 Pro does have a smaller battery with 30-watt fast charging, but with no wireless charging. So overall, you get better battery life on the V60, and you also get wireless charging as opposed to the smaller battery on the 7 Pro with no wireless charging. So the V60 does win in the battery department if you want a phone that is going to give you the most amount of juice. So I think that's pretty much it. That pretty much wraps up everything. So be sure to let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.